The voice of sharing Durian ASEAN.
Hi, this is Arlene, and today we have Adrian L. Chew. He's the lawyer and a member of the Bar Council Constitutional Law Committee. He's also the chairperson of the Human Rights and Constitutional Law Committee for the Advocates Association in Sarawak. Today he'll be talking about the Federal Constitution on Sabah and Sarawak. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Arlene.
Yeah. So first of all, regarding on the Federal Constitution on Sabah and Sarawak, can you explain further on how it affects Sabah and Sarawak?
Well,
and how it was formatted. I mean, what was the agreement in the beginning?
like how did Sabah and Sarawak
Yeah.
become, how did we form Malaysia?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you want to understand that, then we'll have to go back in history.
Mm-hmm.
You, like if you know your history, then you know that Sarawak was under the Brooke rule for, I think, more than 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a dynasty, and in Sabah they were under the rule of
The White Rajas, right?
Yes,
They
the
call
White
it.
Rajas.
Yeah.
Yes, and in Sabah they were under the rule of a company, the North Borneo Chartered Company.
Mm-hmm.
So all along, both Sabah and Sarawak, the people of Sabah and Sarawak have always wanted to achieve independence. Under the Brooke rule, even one of the Sir Raja Charles Viner Brooke even declared that one of the goals of their rule was to give the people of Sarawak self-rule in due course when they were ready.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, eh?
Yes, and so if you look at both states, Sabah, they eventually during the war they came to be occupied by the Japanese. Same thing with Sarawak, and after liberation, both states came under the rule of the British government. They became crown colonies.
Mm-hmm.
So during that time, again, there was talk about achieving independence, and same thing. And if you remember, after the war, Britain was trying to get out of the business of empire because it was costly and money was a problem. So they wanted to give these two states independence. But who do they give them to? You can't let these two states just appear there alone. They needed security.
Mm-hmm.
So around that time, Sabah, Sarawak, and Brunei, we were in discussions about forming our own federation.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't really happen because in Sarawak, back in the 60s, if you remember Southeast Asia, there was communist activities was quite rife.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of concern because in Sarawak, there was a lot of communist activities. It was a hotbed. So Sabah wasn't keen to let Sarawak join this new federation of Brunei because
Or not, you will be a communist state.
yeah, it might infiltrate to North Borneo. So there was concern. So around that time, Tunku Abdul Rahman, 1961, they were discussing an alternative federation with Malaya and Singapore. So the people in Sarawak were looking at this and considering, why not we join them? And if you look at Malaya, they have the institutions of government are there.
Mm-hmm.
There's parliament, there's the judiciary system. They can even offer us security.
I have a side question, maybe not related to the federal constitution, but why Sabah and Sarawak and not Kalimantan together? Because it's the whole of Borneo is supposed to be together.
Yes. Kalimantan, I guess, with Indonesia.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know that.
Okay, anyway, continue. So what were among the negotiation with between Sabah Sarawak and the Malayan government at that time?
What before the formation took place, the British government is still in the scene. So the British government set up this commission called the Cobalt Commission. So the commission traveled around East Malaysia to Sabah and Sarawak to speak to all the people. They had discussions with representatives from all the tribes and people from the urban areas and rural areas to find out what they wanted. So the conclusion they came to is that East Malaysia wanted to achieve federation with Malaya. So that was agreed. But then the people of East Malaysia said, all right, we'll join the federation, but we have some special requests.
Conditions.
Yes, we want conditions.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to be treated as just another state. We're not going to be your... at that time with Singapore, we didn't want to be the 13th and 14th state.
I see.
We wanted to come in as partners.
Partners.
So you have Malaya with your 11 states and plus Singapore. and then you have Sabah and Sarawak. We're not going to be another state.
When you mention partners, what were among the negotiation points that were being discussed?
The things that we wanted. I mean, we came. Sarawak had this thing called the 18 points. Sabah had 20 points. What they wanted. They wanted things like English to be preserved. They didn't want...
Oh yeah, talking about English to be preserved, even their courts is being conducted in English,
yes,
isn't
today
it?
it's still in English.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, these are the things we call our special interests. And, so we wanted these things to be safeguarded.
And one other suggestion is to have Borneoization, to have the natives to lead the local government in Sabah and Sarawak.
Yeah, one of the things on the 18 and the 20 points thing was we wanted Borneoization of the civil service, because we were worried that once the British officers left, who's going to head the civil service? So we wanted an assurance from Malaya that in due course, once the British officers left, people from our own states would rise and be promoted to those positions.
Although now it's left to
it's a bit different, yes.
To be seen. Can you explain more about the special interests and safeguards involved?
Okay, both states, we wanted immigration control. We wanted to control who gets to come in and stay in the state. So that's one of the things, border control.
Is it the case why for those from Peninsular Malaysia, we have only 3 months visa? Or what
yes,
call
that's
it,
one
like,
of it. Yes,
on arrival visa.
And you have to show your MyCard when you arrive. Previously, you had to show your passport.
I see.
Yeah, so it's easier now.
Easier now.
Yeah. And
what else?
Another thing was lawyers. If you want to practice law in either Sabah and Sarawak, you have to be a local resident. You have to show you have Sarawak connections or Sabah connection.
So people from Peninsula cannot...
Unless you're married to a local.
Okay.
Yeah. And we also have a separate high court. And this high court is called the High Court in Sabah and Sarawak. Different from the High Court of Malaya.
What are the differences?
Well, we have jurisdiction over cases in Sabah and Sarawak.
And do you have special laws that you don't have in Malaysia? In Peninsular Malaysia?
For example, in Peninsular Malaysia, things that come on land matters, they all come under the National Land Code.
I see.
That doesn't apply to us. We have our own land codes. You have your own legislation that governs local government. We have our own.
Yeah. Do you have also special courts that you don't have in Peninsular Malaysia?
We have native courts.
Explain to me more about the native courts, because I don't think we have it in Malaysia. Even though we have Orang Asli, the original people in Malaysia, in Peninsular Malaysia, but we don't have such court. And what's the function of a court?
This native courts, they hear cases that affect marriage or customs or adat. So we have our own structure of courts where it starts with the headman's court, and it goes up to Penghulu court. There's an actual structure that goes up, and it can be reviewed by a high court.
I see.
Yeah, because native courts can't mete out punishments like imprisonment. They can mete out fines. But
very light punishment
yes.
for very light cases also.
Yeah.
But why they have a native court instead of having a normal, typical civil court that we have in Peninsula?
This is one of the safeguards. I think it's to preserve that identity we have. Your adat and your culture, your customs. A civil court would not be able to understand the intricacies of all these things.
And I think the native court is based on the idea of... it's not based on the idea of when you do something wrong, you need to be punished. It's based on the idea that you should learn from your mistake and be forgiven.
Yes. And it does look more at your community, how you fit in. And,
harmonization of the law with the community. Other than that, what else that protects the special interests of Sabah and Sarawak? And do they have different special interests in particular area of Sabah and Sarawak? Or is it the same?
The same. The same. But there are other special interests that I should try to highlight. We have additional sources of revenue. We have special grants of money from the federal government that other states in Malaysia do not have. When it comes to administration of the state's civil service, we get some assistance from the federal government to pay salaries and all that. And we get to charge our own sales tax.
I see.
Yes. So that's additional
when you say
revenue.
you get to charge your own sales tax, so that means with the upcoming implementation of the GST, will it be implemented in
That's
Sabah
going
and
to be
Sarawak?
that's why some parties are complaining that it's overlapping.
Yeah, it is overlapping, isn't it?
So there's a debate going on also.
And Peninsula Malaysia, they are going to abolish the sales tax. I mean, the current goods and services sales tax.
Yes.
But with the GST, will it be both
That's why
implemented
it
in
hasn't
Sabah
been
Sarawak?
resolved. That's why.
It hasn't been
Yeah.
resolved. Okay, interesting about that. What else that related to sources of revenue for Sabah and Sarawak that is not related to the peninsula?
We get to charge. We get more income from there's additional income from. Sorry. Yeah, we there's also revenue from our ports and our harbors, and there's excise duties on things that from mining, for example, natural resources.
Yeah, it's written here in the Rakyat guidebooks, guide pamphlets. One of it is you receive revenues from lands, mines, forests, entertainment, specific services by the state departments. But what about revenues from other commodities such as oil and gas?
Well, under the Petroleum Development Act, Sabah and Sarawak, we get 5% royalty.
But in the current state of Sabah and Sarawak economy, is the 5% part of the revenue?
That is part of the revenue.
So
And that's why there are certain parties saying that it's not enough. We should be entitled to 20%.
I see, interesting.
Yes, because it would help us a lot in terms of our infrastructure.
But in that case, Sabah and Sarawak has better bargaining power compared to states like Kelantan and Terengganu. I don't think they receive that equal percentage compared to Sabah and Sarawak.
Yes, and especially since 2008, with the general elections, Sabah and Sarawak have definitely attained more bargaining power in terms of politics. So that does assist, and that's why you start to hear more discussions now on the 20% royalty. They're demanding this.
Even a member of parliaments in both camps, pro-government and also opposition within Sabah and Sarawak, are demanding rights of the people there.
Yes.
Which is interesting.
Yes.
It shows that you don't have to be partisan for the rights of the people.
Yes.
What are other special interests when it comes to to preserve the identity of the Sabahan and the Sarawakian?
I think if you look at things like border control, that is to preserve our identity in some ways. Like even with the development of land and all that, how it's controlled by us, it's not under the National Land Code. All this goes towards controlling the rate of development. Because as you understand, Sabah and Sarawak is still, if you compare it to West Malaysia, it's still backward. And the urban-rural gap is quite big. So by being able to control who comes in, in some ways you're controlling or you're preventing criminal elements. You're preventing divisive politics from coming in. Because Sabah and Sarawak, the politics there is very, very different. Race relations is different.
What is the different features of politics in Sabah Sarawak that maybe to us in Peninsula Malaysia, it might seem a bit, we might seem a bit disconnect from the politics there?
If you compare, the one thing that stands out is that West Malaysian politics is more about race and religion. It's different in East Malaysia. East Malaysia, we know we have differences. We know, of our cultural differences, but people accept it and people get along. Whereas over in West Malaysia, there's this tendency to politicize religion, politicize race. And this is very alien to East Malaysia. And that's why we can, when we read the news and we watch TV, you can sense the tension in West Malaysia. And that's why in East Malaysia, with border controls and immigration, in some ways the state government is trying to prevent certain politicians that are bringing this divisive agenda into the state. We're trying to preserve that harmony that we have.
When you talk about border control, which is quite interesting because these few years we've seen high numbers of illegal activities in Sabah, especially, for example, the terrorist act or the kidnapping act at one of the hotel in Semporna towards one of the Chinese tourists. Another one is in the past there's this project IC where a lot of illegal immigrants from southern Philippines that flooded Sabah. I mean, how much of this border control are being exercised in actuality?
That's the thing. Border control is an internal thing. It's a state thing. But defense of the state, that is a federal thing. That comes under the armed forces. So you have a situation where border control can be rendered meaningless. We may have bargained for this special interest, but it's actually quite meaningless if your federal government is a strong federal government, but it can easily undermine border control. For example, illegal immigrants coming in. If an illegal immigrant is given a My card and becomes a Malaysian citizen, there's nothing that the state government can do to prevent them from coming in. So all this talk about border control and is meaningless if a federal government, especially when you talk about Project IC, if these illegal immigrants can get a My card, then they can just come in. This control is easily undermined.
So far, as you may see, right, how much of this special interest and safeguard protection towards the people of Sabah and Sarawak has truly reflected the spirit and identity of the people there? Or do you think there should be something more to this bargaining of the Constitution?
I think the way it is now is quite sufficient. All it needs now is a political will to give those special interests, those safeguards, meaning. Right now, what we see is an erosion of those safeguards, the safeguards that we wanted to preserve our identity, is being eroded. For example, when Sabah and Sarawak were in discussions to form Malaysia, if you look at the 18 points and the 20 points, one of the things was that we didn't want a state religion. It wasn't important to us because we understood. We had religious and we had racial, we had cultural diversity, and that was a good thing. We didn't need an official religion. But as time passed, as in the case of Sabah, there is now an official religion, which is Islam, but it still guarantees freedom of religion for other religions. But you can see this creeping in already.
Yeah, that's true. Let's touch more on the freedom of religion provision under the Constitution towards Sabah and Sarawak. So in Sabah and Sarawak, it has been quite a practice where religion has not been an issue at all among different society, even between Muslims and people of different faith. How has the politics of Peninsula really affected the people on the ground?
Well, if Sabah and Sarawak, we've always had this history of intermarriage between the different faiths.
Even is it even allowed between interfaith marriage between Muslim and other faiths?
That's the thing. Before Federation, I don't think it was an issue. People just accept it. But then after Federation, especially lately in the past decade or 2 decades, you're seeing, if you marry a Muslim and a non-Muslim marries a Muslim, there's now a forced conversion of the Muslim partner to embrace Islam. So you have things like that, and other things in West Malaysia which, thank God, we don't see it yet. For example, body snatching from morgues or forced conversion of children. So far, those things have not cropped up yet. But if we do not put a stop to it, you can see it. All these things is naturally creeping in.
Yeah, especially it's interesting that you are bordering Brunei, and Brunei will be implementing Hudud, very, very soon. And Brunei being a very Islamic nation with a very strong Islamic identity, has this affected the people of Sabah and Sarawak?
No, the politics of Brunei does not have any influence on us. They're their own state, their own country next to us. But they basically they do their own thing. Yeah.
And also I want to touch on the Sharia law in Sabah and Sarawak, because it's part of the system and it's under the constitution. How much different the state Sharia law in Sabah and Sarawak compared to probably in Peninsular Malaysia, or in specifically maybe in certain states in Malaysia?
The structure is the same. The laws that govern Sharia law in Sarawak or Sabah is passed by the state governments. But in terms of the judicial structure is the same. But you do see that in Sabah and Sarawak they're less zealous when it comes to
there's less moral policing,
yes,
I guess.
Less of that.
Or do they don't have moral policing at all?
There is, but you do hear of certain politicians making statements. But then it's just different from West Malaysia. In West Malaysia, you have the enforcement is quite.
Yeah.
You read a lot about the news.
And together with the Fatwa Council,
Yes.
where they
Yeah.
they release very interesting fatwas on on society's morality.
Yeah, but it's different in Sabah and Sarawak. It's more tolerant.
I see.
Yeah.
What about the federal imposition of a certain Islamic law? Is it equally being forcefully imposed to Sabah and Sarawakian also?
No. Matters that affect Islam in the states are governed by the state government. They do not come from the federal side. Yes.
Okay, clear on that. Lastly, I think I want to know more about other issues regarding on the structure of the Sabah and Sarawak government.
It's very similar to the federal government. Now, federal government, you have the head of state is the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. Coming down, you have the prime minister, who's the head of the executive, and below him is his cabinet. And this cabinet, they're made up of ministers. Ministers are all elected members of parliament. So that's the federal government structure. You compare that to the state government structure, it's identical almost.
So you don't have Yang di-Pertuan.
We have the head of state in Sabah and Sarawak would be the Yang di-Pertuan Negeri or the TYT.
But who is the Yang di-Pertuan Negeri? Because as far as I know, in Sabah and Sarawak, it's not a sultanate system, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's by appointment.
I see. Who
the Yang di-Pertuan Agong will appoint a suitable candidate to become the Yang di-Pertuan Negeri.
Is the person part of the royal family? Or
No.
Can be
anyone.
anyone.
Can be anyone.
I see.
Yes, so you have the TYT or the governor at the top. Below him will be the chief minister, the equivalent of the prime minister at federal level. So the chief minister will have his own cabinet, and his cabinet we will have ministers, and these ministers are also elected representatives who are assemblymen. If you're elected to the state legislative assembly, you're called an assemblyman. Compared to in the federal structures, you're a member of parliament.
Yeah.
Yes.
I see. What about how they pass a state law or the way they negotiate?
It's identical.
It's identical.
The process
exactly.
is identical to the federal side. The
legislative
yes.
process is identical. So I guess anything else that we might not know or we have missed out on the areas of Sabah and Sarawak when it comes to the federal constitution?
The thing that sets Sabah and Sarawak apart is the special interest that we have and the special safeguards. Now, those safeguards, it's if in Parliament, in the federal government, if you want to change a law, amend it, or you want to repeal it, in some cases, so long as you have a simple majority, you can do that. But with laws that affect those special interests concerning Sabah and Sarawak, a simple majority they cannot bring about any amendment or any repeal of those things. That's why we demanded additional safeguards to make sure that in the event you have a very strong federal government, it cannot then act to take away all these special protections. That's why when it comes to those matters listed as special interest to Sabah and Sarawak, it's not a simple majority. In Parliament, they need a 2/3 majority. And even then, that's still not enough. There's an additional thing where the concurrence of the governor of either state, they must get the concurrence of the governor, and the governor only acts upon advice by the state cabinet. So there's this additional protection to
upon
make
advice. What does that mean in lay terms?
Meaning the governor cannot act on his own. He cannot make a decision and say, this is my decision and it's going to affect the state.
It has to
come from the government of the state.
So a majority of the ministries have to agree with this.
Yes, because the governor is just a figurehead, head of state.
I think I might miss out on this. Is there any special interest or safeguards that is not being written in the constitution, but is considered is part of their the special interest of the Sabahan and the Sarawakian?
Immigration control, as I was mentioning earlier, that isn't in the constitution. That comes under an act, the Immigration Act. So I think Part 7 of the Immigration Act gives Sabah and Sarawak control over who gets to enter, who gets to have a social pass or an entry pass. So that's how we control. And that's not in the constitution.
So anything to add on besides this? So I guess that's all about the federal constitution on Sabah and Sarawak. I think we have a complete overview of how it works and what are the special interests and safeguards and also protection for the Sabahan and Sarawakian. Thank you very much, Adrian, for coming to Durian ASEAN.
Thanks, Arlene.